Welcome back to Uncaged Sports Talk. On today's episode, I got a few things I want to get into. It's going to be a shorter episode than usual than the last few episodes, but I want to get into the James Harden situation first, as that's one of the more recent topics in this area, in the area that I'm from in Delaware and Philly. This James Harden and Daryl Morey situation took a turn yesterday, and I'm at the point with both of them. You got to get rid of. You got to get rid of both of them. You can't keep Morey because free agents aren't going to want to come here because people aren't going to want to sign with Harden, and Harden's just causing another issue trying to force his way out of his third team in 3 years. But players are going to side with Harden, so they're not going to trust Morey when it comes down to free agency. If they're debating between the Sixers and another team, both teams offer the same amount of money. They're going to be like, "Yeah, I don't want to go play for Morey." James Harden, someone I trust, called him a liar. Because players are going to trust their guy over GM, because GMs also have a reputation of being backstabbers sometimes. But this situation just got nasty the other day when he called him a liar, called him out for being a liar. First, I have a bone to pick with James Harden, though. Harden holding out for the third time in 3 years. Like, give me a break, Harden. You've been struggling in the last few years. You opted in. You could have became a free agent. You opted into your deal, first of all. But you could have became a free agent if you really wanted to. But you decided to opt in because you wanted to be greedy and you wanted to try to go to a team who could win as well and try to get more money on that team. You wanted to try to get a max on that team, but you needed to opt in and get traded. But the Clippers aren't willing to give what the Sixers want. They're giving bad offers, horrible offers for James Harden. So Morey's saying, "Yeah, I'm not trading James for any of that. I'm not trading James for any of that." It's horrible offers. They're offering Norman Powell, Robert Covington, just people like that for James Harden. It's just like, yeah, keep that over there in Los Angeles. I'll keep Harden. I'll hold him until I get a better offer from someone else. But why even opt in the first place if you really wanted out? You could have just became a free agent, went somewhere else, and gotten your money. Like, if it's about the money, go show you deserve the max this year. You're on a team that can win if you stay. It's going to take some miracles, but if you stay, you're on a team that can win. And go show you deserve it. Instead of quit on the team like you did last year in the playoffs. You quit on the team in game 6 and 7, which ultimately led to them losing in the playoffs. You don't deserve that contract after quitting. I think this all stemmed him calling Morey a liar from last year when Harden took a cheaper deal. I think when Harden took a cheaper deal, they had an understanding that this offseason Morey would pay him. But Morey most likely backed out after Harden quit in the playoffs, after Harden didn't show up in game 7 at all. Pitiful showing from James in game 7 against the Celtics. And then game 6 didn't show up at all at the end. So I think Morey backed out of the deal, which I don't blame him, but it's also causing a problem if a player is saying they don't trust the GM, because other players are going to believe the player over the GM, which is going to stop you from getting players you want in the long run. I just think this situation's horrible for the Sixers. Harden forcing his way out of his third team in 4 years, that takes his value down a lot because people are going to be like, we don't want that nonsense here. If he leaves, if we get him, he's just going to cause the same problem in a year or two and then leave. Like, not a good idea having that on your team. And then you also got just the fact that he didn't show up in the playoffs. Holding out, this could turn into another Ben Simmons type situation where he doesn't play and it's just at a standstill until Morey finds what he wants. I think at the end of this year, the most likely thing, though, I think Harden's traded this year, but at the end of this year, Morey is probably let go of. He should be fired like right now if the owner cares about winning at all. But if you wait until next offseason, I think it winds up that Embiid winds up asking out next offseason or the year after. But I think Embiid's time in Philly is coming to an end within the next 2 years. He's gonna see this dumpster fire of an organization and wound up leaving Philly. Now to pivot to a different topic. If anyone, I hinted at it last week on the show. If anyone watched the Johnny Manziel documentary, that documentary was pretty interesting. There were some cool stories they mentioned in it. I wouldn't say cool, actually. That's a weird word to use for it, but some interesting stories, very interesting stories about the Johnny Manziel situation throughout the years from college all the way to the NFL. He was in a bad situation, like bad place in his life after the NFL and when his career ended. First, like after he had his first ever bad game at A&M, like his first ever game at A&M, it was bad, and he had signs in his yard at his house on campus to sell their place because people were like, "Yeah, we don't want this QB. We're in the SEC now. We need a better QB." But then he had a hero moment against Alabama as a freshman in 2012, which is where his popularity skyrocketed. But when that popularity skyrocketed is when he started to go a bit south. Him and his friend started an autograph business to make money because they saw that people were making money off of him, making money off of his likeness. So he was like, I want a piece of this. They're making money off of me. I want a piece of this. Like, I should be getting some of this money. So they started the autograph business, started making money, and were living the life. But then they got caught by the NCAA, which is where some of the Johnny's drama starts. His friend came up with a spin though, so he wouldn't get caught, and his friend would be a fall guy as well. They created a spin that he came from oil money, that his family came from oil money. So when the NCAA saw it, they were like, okay, we know why he's going to all these places now. His family's just rich, which that was just a lie. His family had some money, but they weren't ultra rich where he could go to all these events sitting front row at Browns game or sitting front row at basketball games, hanging out with LeBron, hanging out with just a bunch of athletes and artists. But this all led him to being thinking he was bigger than Texas A&M in college football. Started missing practices, which he didn't do in high school at all. Then when he started to go to the NFL, when he was trying to improve his draft stock, he had to cut that friend off, which is wrong, but they told him he had to cut him off to improve his image. Even though his image did not improve at all, it got worse, honestly. And then there was an interesting story. I was like, that's insane. If anyone heard about the Manziel at the combine, his aid his agent had a plan for him to get drafted, gave him drug tests so when teams came asking about it, the agent could be like, look, I gave him all this. He can be trusted. He messed up the day before the combine. He went to a party in Beverly Hills with a bunch of like big name people at the party, a who's who of people at the party, and messed up. So when he went to the combine, he would have had to taken a drug test his second day there. So his agent set up a plan to get him clean for the drug tests, which the first plan was going to be have his dad fake a heart attack, which that would have been insane if that would have came out after, like, if that would have happened and came out that he faked the heart attack. That would have been insane, faking a heart attack to get your son out of a drug test. But then they wound up getting him a bunch of Pedialytes. They had to sneak it past GMs in an elevator. They had to just get it all into the agent's room, and he just kept drinking fluids to flush it all out. But Johnny, he was a pro at this. He was a pro at passing these drug tests. He told his agent a secret that in college, to pass drug tests, he was having his four-string backup QB take the drug test for him so he could pass them. And then another wild story I found interesting. Him and a wide receiver got drunk before his workout for the Browns, which the wide receiver was hungover, so he couldn't help out the practice. He couldn't work out the private workout, which was horrible for Johnny, but a Browns move would still be taking him, which they did. he had to throw to his agent and lawyer because his wide receivers were drunk. That's insane that they still took him. He had to throw to a lawyer and his agent because his wide receivers were drunk at the pro day or private workout. He tried to stop being Johnny Football though at a certain point and wanted out of Cleveland. So he just went on a bender in Vegas right before he was supposed to play a game. And they were like, yeah, we've had enough of this. At first, he didn't even want to go to Cleveland. He wanted to go to Dallas, which I remember thinking Johnny Manziel in Dallas would have been insane. I thought that was the place he was going to go when the draft was going on. But when he went to Cleveland, he did not want to be there, and he got tired of being Johnny Football. He wanted to just go back to being Johnny Manziel without the fame. So he just tried to ease himself away, was on drugs, though. Almost committed suicide. But then his family eventually got him to go to rehab, I believe, which he seems to be good now. But just wild, all the stuff he went through in his younger years. For people that aren't in the NFL, you see a lot of that for like frat guys, frat boys in college. That's more what he was than being a football player. If he wasn't on the drugs or alcohol, the sky could have been the limit for him. He had a bunch of the talent. He was short, but the drugs and alcohol did him, and it messed him up. He let the fame get to his head and wasn't the player he could have been when he got to the NFL. And Cleveland was also just a horrible spot for Johnny Manziel. I thought that was a bad spot when they drafted him. It was like, yeah, that's bust central there in Cleveland. But if you don't want to be a bust, if you have a car that's a bust, you can go to my friend Dan the Man Stanley at Sheridan Nissan, where they will hook you up with a brand new car. Just tell them Luke sent you, and they will set you up with a brand new car. Now to pivot to Luke's list. Some of these guys could wind up being good players in the NFL. Some of them could be busts like Johnny Manziel. Starting at number 5 is Aiden O'Connell, quarterback out of Purdue, 4th round out of Purdue. The Raiders drafted him. And a 4th round QB could turn into a starter eventually. He did fairly good in his first game. 15 for 18. He has the size of a prototypical starter, 141 yards and 1 touchdown. Then you got Tank Dell, who CJ Stroud requested him to be picked. In the first half alone, this was his stat line for the game, but it was all in the first half. 5 receptions, 65 yards, and 1 touchdown. Tank Dell had himself a game for Houston in their first preseason game. At number 3 is a corner from Philly that I have my eyes on. Eli Ricks. I had my eyes on more on Keely Ringo, but Keely had himself a good game. But Eli Ricks, undrafted, he had 12 coverage snaps, only targeted 4 times, allowed a 0 passer rating, had 1 pass breakup, and 1 pick 6. Coming out of high school, he was the number 2 corner in his class, and the Eagles got him as an undrafted corner. That's insane where the Eagles were able to get him the value. Could be a steal, and the Eagles' cornerback room is deep this year, very deep. So for the fact he stood out as an undrafted guy, stood out above Keely, who got a lot of time playing. And Keely did really good for himself. A lot of guys in the corner room for the Eagles did really good in that preseason game. But Eli stood out above the rest. I'm interested to see what he can do the rest of the preseason and see if he can make the team. As of now, I think he's going to. But Eagles are going to have some tough decisions at the cornerback position. Next is another cornerback on this list, Deonte Banks for the Giants, 1st-round pick for the Giants. He stood out big time in his preseason debut. He had 23 coverage snaps, 3 targets, was only targeted 3 times, and gave up 0 receptions. And he was covering a 1st-round pick from the year prior, Jamison Williams, which to be covering Jamison Williams and only allow 3 targets and 0 receptions when covering Jamison Williams for the majority of the time, That's very impressive. That's very impressive, and Giants may have been able to get themselves a steal there. Or I wouldn't say a steal in the first round, but they may have gotten themselves a stud for a corner. Helped their secondary drastically. They need some talent, as seen in that playoff game against the Eagles. But Deontay Banks could potentially be a step in the right direction at him. Since he's out of Maryland too, local kid, but hopefully, or for the not hopefully, but he could be a step in the right direction for the Giants. Then some honorable mentions. One is A.T. Perry for the Saints, wide receiver. He had 6 targets. He caught all 6. He had 70 yards and a touchdown, which was very impressive for him in his preseason debut. I think the Saints may have gotten a steal. He was a 6th-round pick, caught every ball. Interested to see what he can do moving forward. I'll have my eye on him the rest of preseason. Stood out to me in the first week of preseason. Then Jalen Carter, Eagles first-round pick, fell to 9 in the draft because of some drama, because of the drama with the crash in Georgia, the accident, which led to a teammate of his dying, which not going to get into that currently. But him falling to 9 after the Bears traded their pick and traded their first-round pick for some teams to trade up, perfect for the Eagles. They got potentially a steal of the draft at 9. I actually have a clip of his only play he had in the game. If he had more plays, I'd put him up higher, but he only had like one drive he was in for. But this play he had, granted it was against a backup guard, but this move by Carter's insane. Swim move gets the QB in like 3 seconds. That I'm very impressed by that with Jalen Carter. I think he could be a steal at 9. That's insane to say a steal at 9, but he could be. He was arguably the best defensive player in the draft. Very impressive. And I've heard some people say it was against a backup guard, but there's more people like Ben Cleveland for the Ravens, more guards like that in the NFL than there are Pro Bowl guards and there are all pro guards. There's guards closer to Ben Cleveland's level than other guards in the league, than top guards in the league. And then the last guy for an honorable mention is Deuce Vaughn out of Kansas State. Very small. His dad actually works for the team, but he was very shifty. His shiftiness and elusiveness stood out in the preseason game against the Jaguars. He had 8 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown. Deuce Vaughn was very impressive in that game for the Cowboys. That could be a steal where they got him late in the draft. I'm interested to see what he can do moving forward, see if he can get a role for them in a regular season. He was very quick and elusive, which is impressive. Then number 1, this guy has had 2 games, so it kind of sets him apart, but he did fairly similar in both games. But Dorian Thompson-Robinson out of UCLA, 5th rounder out of UCLA for the Cleveland Browns. So far in 2 games, he's 17 for 21, 184 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, hasn't been sacked at all. He's had 9 rushes for 43 yards. For 2 games, that's a great stat line. The Browns may have found themselves a steal in that 5th round out of UCLA, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Chip Kelly was his coach in college. Eagles currently got a former Chip Kelly QB, but that's besides the point. But he's been impressive to start his preseason. I'm interested to see what he can do next week or this upcoming week and the week after. Browns might have a steal if Deshaun has another bad year or 2 there. Maybe see what Dorian Thompson-Robinson can do if given a larger role eventually. They may have gotten themselves a steal there. There were a few other guys who stood out in preseason. Like I mentioned Keely Ringo when I was watching the Eagles game. Tyree Cleveland, he was a receiver on the Eagles. He stood out when I was watching for sure. I saw him make a few catches. But overall, this week of preseason no starters really played at all. A lot of teams gave their starters a break. Interested to see what the starters are going to do this week. But the main reason I was watching the preseason games is honestly to see potential fantasy targets, see players who could wind up being something eventually one day. These players are going to get extended time in week 3. A lot of these players on this list, which I'm very excited to see when week 3 of the preseason rolls around. Should be interesting the rest of preseason. What we have coming up on the show, though, to pivot for the as we close out today's show, on the, coming up on future episodes next week, I plan on doing a mock draft for fantasy football. Fantasy football season is right around the corner. Draft season's actually in the thick of it, probably right now. We're in the thick of fantasy football draft season. I actually had my first draft on Monday night. I wound up getting Jamar Chase at the second pick, but the reason I did that is because I had the second pick in another one, and I'm probably going to take CMC in that one, but I'll get into that in the next episode here on Uncaged Sports Talk. But I'm excited for fantasy football this season. I think I got a really good team last night. Only problem with it was Greg Dulcich. I'll show it on next episode. But it's got some good depth. It's probably the best, one of the better teams in the league. ESPN ranked it at 5th. But overall for fantasy, it should be a fun fantasy season. I think there's a lot of guys who could be steals. One of the guys I mentioned last week, Dalton Kincaid, is a guy I'm very high on for fantasy football. But that's just a hint at next week's show. Next week's going to be a big fantasy football show. Have on probably like 2 guests. We'll do like a mock draft. I'll talk about our thoughts on certain guys, where we think certain guys should go, and how we think certain drafts should play out, which I'm very excited for that. Overall, with the episodes after that, the following week, I'm probably going to have some people on for a college football episode, since college football is starting off that week. That's the first week of college football. And then week 1 of the NFL will follow, where it'll be just strictly football talk. That show will probably go an hour, just talking strictly about football and nothing else that about the NFL that day. Gonna be I'll give a Luke's list of my power rankings, my top 10 NFL teams, top 10 QBs probably, my predictions for the year, my predictions for who I think is going to be in the Super Bowl, MVP predictions, and I'll try to have a few guests on for that week. And I might even get into a game I might wind up going to that weekend. University of Delaware is playing Penn State, which I'll probably get into that weekend because I might go to that game at Penn State. I went to the University of Delaware, and I've never been to Beaver Stadium, which that's a bucket list. But that's what we have lined up for Uncaged Sports Talk, which should be a fun next few weeks as football season gets closer and closer. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow on all platforms, and comment on all of our videos and posts. It is very appreciated. Tune in next week for Uncaged Sports Talk.